Let's see, we left off on let's go to page 50. Let's go to page 50 here. I forgot exactly where we left off. Let's go to the right-hand column here in the middle there, right after that article where it says, now that you can see this protective shield must deal with, because, when we look at the things that are going on, throughout the world and the earth is suffering, then you can see that this protective shield that Yahweh made, and that's the whole reason why he made it, is to protect mankind, because remember, we live on the outside of the planet, and we need this for our health. And so by Satan working in ways to try and destroy this through the sins of mankind, she is very, very wise in what she does. And you can see how this protective shield is coming down little by little, is being affected. Now we can see that this protective shield must deal with at least 1,800 types of bacteria. And notice too that in the bacteria in air samples that they found a widely varied bacterial population that rival the diversity found in soil. So, it really surprised them to find these many different things. And remember, this is a very small sample too in which they found these things. So this is just a small amount of what is actually there. But what they have discovered so far is really astounding to them. So it says, very limited work has been done in this field of cataloging organisms in the air, because there's more things in there that they have no idea what's there, because they haven't taken the time to study. And even if they did, they would never discover all of these things. We have species that we don't even know exist. There's millions and millions of species of living organisms that haven't even been discovered yet. And this is in animals and insects and so forth, These things that haven't even been found yet. Notice also, and to think that this was the mind that mankind was made with. Adam was able to give a name to every living creature on earth, that flew in the air, that crawled on the soil, that lived in the trees, that lived in the water and so forth. All of these things were given names by Adam. That's the mind that Yahweh put in him. So, Adam was an example of what mankind could be when he's fresh and new and not tainted with sin. And this is the reason why Satan has worked with things the way they are, is because it causes a confusion. When the confusion causes someone not to be able to think straight, not to be able to use the mind that Yahweh has originally given into them. Well, notice also found were organisms and microbes from sewer treatment plants. Yummy, yummy, great stuff there. Well, all these things are found because, in the sewer treatment plants, the microbes have a job to do, and so forth. But these things, mankind can be affected by them because of the fact that there's certain microorganisms that's not conducive to human life to bring joy and gladness to it and so forth, So these things can actually harm the bodies. Now, they found in the atmosphere microbes capable of killing people and animals, but also capable of killing Pacific coral. And then this is a bad thing, because remember, they know they have done studies and have found these things. The coral reefs are dying off and so forth. And the coral disease actually are dying off because of mankind's STDs that have gotten into the water. The House of Yahweh was warned about the beaches and so forth and stuff, because no one really thinks about, here's a beach and you get all of these millions of people walking along the beach that are all carrying STDs, and then they go into the water to swim. Well, the way that Yahweh has made the earth, he has made it to where the salt water and so forth can cleanse itself, and does cleanse itself to a certain extent. But remember, because of man's sins continually going on, the continuation of it is what continues to keep overwhelming things. Now, Yahweh can make it to where the earth could clean itself and it would be perfectly fine in man's bodies, that no one would have STDs, and none of the earth would be affected by any of these things. But remember, he allows it to take place because he's teaching mankind a lesson. He's showing you this is the results of sin. So therefore, he's allowing these things to be overtaken and to cause the sickness and the disease that's out there, and these things are spreading. But it's all because of he's trying to teach mankind a lesson. This is what takes place if these laws are not kept, if these purity laws are not followed in a specific manner, if this law is not kept in a specific manner, if the ashes of the red heifer are not used on these certain days, it will not be effective, and it won't cleanse you from death and so forth. All of these things are for a reason, and it's all made for mankind. And one day, as we're studying in the laboratories of Yahweh, going through the classes and so forth, we're going to learn and understand the makeup of these microbes and what keeps them alive, and what is needed to keep them joyful in life and so forth. Because these are the things that we're going to be supplying for them. Notice also they found organisms, it's true, okay, killing people, coral reefs, okay. These microbes, Anderson stresses, were very different populations in microbes in the air. Thousands of microbes that change, notice, they change. How do they change? Well, in the following article here, we're going to see that, and remember that microbes change, okay? So following, you'll see the microbes that kill, and they kill other microbes. And they're multiplying in the earth, plants and animals and people, and the so-called ozone layer. Keep in mind all the things that we've covered so far about these things. Okay, let's look at this article here. HIV is a member of a group of viruses called retroviruses. A retrovirus is a virus that changes itself very rapidly, and we're talking about very, very rapidly, okay? Because remember, you're talking about things that's going on inside your human body when your body is continually making millions of cells, a second and so forth. So one reason why HIV is a particularly serious infection is that it attacks and destroys cells of the immune system called T cells or CD4 cells that are designed to fight infections and disease. So notice, they were designed this way. This is the way that Yahweh made them, is to go in and to fight infection and to fight off disease. And when we think about the way that Yahweh made the body and even the simple makeup of blood. You have red blood cells, you have white blood cells, you have platelets and so forth. When you cut yourself, and you begin to bleed, then the platelets will actually begin to increase through the bloodstream, go to the source of the cut, and actually begin to pile up. And this is what causes the blood to clot, to stop bleeding and so forth. So it's amazing the way that Yahweh made the body with all these things. Okay, so after HIV penetrates these cells, now notice it goes to the cell. This is a virus that would change itself, and it goes after these cells. After it penetrates these cells, now cell is tremendously small, but HIV is even smaller. It takes over the machinery, or it reprograms the cell, so that it begins to produce many copies of the virus. So instead of the cell doing the job it's supposed to do, it begins to replicate all of these different viruses to where it completely takes over the entire cell, and eventually the cell will burst, and then it releases all of these other viruses. And then they go to different parts of the body, and they do the same thing again with all these cells. So you can see how it keeps multiplying. Eventually, HIV destroys the immune cells. Another reason why HIV is a very serious infection is that it has the ability to mutate or to change itself rapidly. This makes it especially difficult for researchers to find an effective treatment or vaccine. Because of the fact that it does, you can't do anything about it. You can't treat it because it's constantly changing. By the time they would figure out what might be helpful, it's already changed to something different. It's mutated to something different. So this is the reason why it can't be treated. Although the hospitals will tell you they can treat you and that they can take all of your money to do it, but they can't because it changes too rapidly. The thing is, you're not going to escape sin. Sin, it brings forth a curse, and the curse is going to be there, and you can't do anything about it. The only thing you can do is repent. There are two types of HIV. This HIV-1 is responsible for a vast majority of infections and cases of AIDS in the world. And HIV-2 is the more common type in West Africa and has a slower course than HIV-1. From the time a person is infected with HIV, the virus begins to damage the immune system. So you see, this is something that is instantly. So remember, the scripture says that a curse won't come without the cause, right? There has to be something that causes that curse to take place. So from the time a person is infected with HIV, the virus begins to damage the immune system. Although an infected person's immune system struggles to fight back and can do so for as many as 10 years or more in an otherwise healthy adult. And this is why people think that they're not affected, This is why they don't think they have any problems with them. But you do. It just doesn't show up. So the virus continues to destroy these defenses until the immune system is too weak to fight off the infections. Well, by that time, you're just about dead, And remember, the scripture says, dying you shall die, okay? So these things are in people, They're even in us. But by keeping Yahweh's laws, we can keep these things at bay, and they won't destroy our lives. But a person can be infected with HIV and not know it, because any symptoms of illnesses related to HIV may not occur for many years after infection. He or she can pass the infection on to others. You see, and that's the sly part, is because Satan wants to make a person think, well, surely you won't die, right? I mean, what's wrong? What's wrong? Look, man, I've been living this lifestyle for 20, 30 years. It ain't bothered me, Sure, you can do it too, And so, because it doesn't show the symptoms right away, and this is what everything is instant, remember. Everything is instant. They got to see everything instantly take place. And if they don't see something instantly take place, then they think it's okay. And that's the deception that's found in the many sins that's in the world. AIDS is an advanced HIV infection. It's a late stage of the infection when the immune system is weakened. Advanced infection with HIV weakens the immune system to the point that it cannot fight off infections as effectively as usual. The individual becomes more susceptible to a variety of infections and other conditions, such as cancer and so forth. Now remember these facts. It says HIV/AIDS is a retrovirus, and a retrovirus can change itself, and a retrovirus attacks and destroys cells, and they can destroy the immune cells. They mutate, they change rapidly in order to destroy. To destroy. HIV is a retrovirus, a type of virus that stores its genetic information on a single-stranded RNA molecule. A single-stranded RNA molecule. After a retrovirus penetrates a cell, it creates a DNA version of its genes, and its DNA becomes part of the infected cell's DNA. And that's how it gets by, is that it continues to be able to replicate itself. It can reproduce and reproduce and reproduce it. And not even the immune system of the human body won't kick in because it sees it as being part of its own DNA. So Satan is very clever in what she does. And you can see how that, sin blinds a person. And like it says, they let the blind lead the blind, and both will fall into the ditch. Because a blind person can't see. And you can't see these things taking place, so therefore this infection remains in the body. It creates havoc with the whole body and starts tearing it down. And any time the body is affected, then the mind is affected. If the mind is affected, the body is affected. It all works together. And it brings a person down to where they can't think clearly, and the confusion sets in. So there's no possible way that they can make a right choice or even decide to do right or to repent or anything like that, because their body and mind are so messed up. So that created DNA version is then welcomed to any part of the body. In fact, the immune system is not alarmed by its presence, so it can do its killing anywhere it's located in the host. So it can go to all different parts of the body. And if it seems like it's being fought against in one part of the body, what's it going to do? It's going to move and it's going to go to another place. And it's going to start working there and see. And so it's going to test the different sites within the body to see what's the easiest location that it can go to and remain in and still do its job of destroying the body without having to fight back? Continue on this article. It says HIV infects one particular type of immune system cell called CD4 cells or T cells. The T cells coordinate immune regulation and secrete specialized factors that activate other white blood cells to fight off infection. So you can see this is the way that Yahweh made it, to where your immune system will, as it says, secrete specialized factors, okay? The different things in the body and in the blood that will actually start activating the white blood cells that go, and the white blood cells are the ones in the immune system that goes into it and goes attack. The red blood cells build up your body and so forth, and carries the oxygen and so forth. So you've got the red and the white blood cells in your body, and both of these have a specific job. In healthy individuals, the number of CD4 cells normally ranges from 450 to 1,200 cells per microliter of blood. And that's the measurement known as the T cell count. And you'll hear about that. Sometimes people will tell you, well, they have this person, they're in the hospital and they ran a blood test and they find out that their white blood cell count is down. Okay, well, that's why they become more susceptible to infection, because they don't have the proper amount or higher amount of white blood cells to be able to fight off that infection. When infected with HIV, a T cell becomes an HIV replicating cell. In other words, the virus binds with the cell, copies itself into the cell's DNA, and causes the cell to begin producing new HIV viruses. So that's how clever this is. It will get into the cell, get into its DNA, and then trick the cell into reproducing more viruses within itself. And so it actually becomes the host. And that's the thing with the virus. A virus needs a host in order to survive. And so it goes after the DNA and begins the cells and begins to reproduce its own DNA in there. Remember, it has the RNA, which can actually produce that. HIV attacks the immune system itself, weakens its ability to fight back. HIV replicates in large quantities that are more than the compromised immune system can handle. And HIV has the ability to mutate or change itself very quickly, making it more difficult for the body to fight the infection. Because by the time the body can begin to fight off, you see, your body has, your immune system has a memory system. And every time you catch a cold, there is always different viruses that are spread. But your body will take that, and when it begins to fight it off with the immune system, it actually makes a record of what it needed to fight that virus off. So the next time you get a virus, if you get the same thing into your body automatically knows, your immune system knows, okay, it looks up in the database, and okay, it's this, send these specific white blood cells out there and destroy it. And so it can fight it off. And this is how your immune system works. But an infected person's body tries to fight off HIV by aggressively manufacturing antibodies, which are tiny bits of protein designed to bind with HIV particles and neutralize them before they can infect more cells. But remember, it works so rapidly that before these white blood cells can get to them and so forth, it's already reproduced itself. And this is what hurts the body. Most HIV tests actually detect the presence of these antibodies, not the HIV itself. So they know that if you have a very large amount of these antibodies that your body is producing, then you must have an infection. So remember these facts, and it will help you understand what's actually destroying this protective shield that Yahweh made to surround the earth. Here's another article. It says, the earth is alive, so are our water and air. Our subterrestrial allies are nature's most efficient recyclers. The soil is indeed a living, breathing firmament in which the primary action taking place is the breakdown of organic matter and the release of plant nutrients. The soil is the decomposer part of the natural cycle that flows from plant and animal production. Remember now, because you've got the plants grow, the animals eat the plants, and then the animals in return end up fertilizing the soil, and the plants can have the nutrition they need, and there's this recycling process that goes over and over and over again, the way that Yahweh made these things. It says with over 10 billion microbes per teaspoon of dry soil. Now that's dry soil. That's not wet soil. That's dry soil. Just dry soil. If you wet it, then of course you're going to increase that amount because there's going to be other microbes within the water itself. And when you think about that, if you had a glass of water, if you could see with your eyes the microscopic world, and you went and got a glass of water from the tap, and you picked it up and you looked at it and you could see all those microbes, you wouldn't want to drink it, because of all the life that's in there, it's just filled with life, but you can't see it, so you drink it, But of course you need this, because you yourself, if you can actually see yourself, you would think, yikes, boy, humans are kind of ugly, because we're just made of all these different microbes. So Yahweh spares us from these things, just like he does from the spirit world. If you've seen the spirit world, when you go out around in the world and you see the spirit world, you would freak out. You couldn't handle it. So in dry soil, and there's some 5,000 different species now. And most are unknown to science. Like I said, they don't really know that, all of them that are there. But at least five, as far as they know, 5,000 different species, and that's just that 1 teaspoon of soil. Can you imagine that? Working that teaspoon, it's premature to evaluate respiration levels in any meaningful way. Healthy crops, turf and ornamentals rely on the soil for food and water. You got healthy crops, turfs, and so forth. The different types of things that grow, like grass and so forth, and different plants and the ornamental plants and so forth. For plants to develop nutrients, particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, must be available in the proper form and amount. Okay, so plants, in order to produce these nutrients, has got to have these things. It's got to have nitrogen, it's got to have phosphorus, and it's got to have potassium. And this is the reason why you can eat certain things. Like I always say, when you do workouts and so forth, you can eat certain fruits, and it gives you the amount of potassium and so forth, puts it back into your body. Soil microorganisms have a sufficient impact on converting nutrients into the form necessary for plant uptake. In other words, the plant's going to take the nutrients from the soil microorganisms into itself and use it. Plus, microbes are directly involved in improving the water-holding capacity of the soil, because it depends upon what type of soil that you have. If you got dry soils, or you want the right mix, because if it's too sandy, then it's not going to hold the water. If it's too much clay, it's certainly not going to hold the water. So you want the right, proper amount. And the microorganisms are the ones that deal with this and actually make up these different types of soils. Plus, microbes are directly involved in improving the water-holding capacity of the soil, improving the structure of the soil, so air, water, and roots can penetrate deep into the soil, alleviating high salt soil conditions and controlling a plant disease by keeping harmful organisms in check. You have soil. Your soil needs air and water so that the roots, as it says, can penetrate deep into the soil. And air enters into the soil through pores into the soil. That insects and earthworms and so forth, as they dig their little burrows and stuff, that's how the air will enter into the soil, because plants need air. Of course, the air in the plants on the soil is different than the air that's out in the air, above the ground, because of the fact that it's more moist or more humid. It's also very more rich in carbon dioxide, because the plants will take that and turn that carbon dioxide into sugars and starches and use it as food in order to grow. And like it says here too, alleviating high salt soil conditions, because salt, remember, too much salt will actually kill a plant, And like Yeshua said, well, if you got salt and it's lost its saltiness, what's it worth for? We used to throw it out on the ground and men walk on it and so forth, right? And, if you wanted to go and invade a place and destroy a place and starve a person out, then they would go in and they would salt the ground. And the salt would kill all the plants, and it would not allow anything to grow. There was a place here in Texas, I think, somewhere. When they go out and they drill for oil, they have their wells and they pump down high pressure water into it to force the oil out. Like when they go in for fracking, oil fracking, and they go in and they push the very high salt solution into the soil, and it pushes it out of the rocks and so forth. Well, this oil remains in there, and sometimes they'll just cap it, and that would be it. They won't even, because there's other chemicals and stuff that would come out of there that would destroy the water supply and so forth. So they'll just leave it in there. Well, this stuff will get into the water system, and there's some places. There's a town somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, in a whole area that's been affected by this, because you could just see the salt coming up out of the wells, and it's emerged out of the ground. And it's just destroyed everything. It kind of looks like the Dead Sea, where everything is just being destroyed because of that salt. And the root systems, when you look at the root systems, I don't know if you ever really looked at plants, as they grow, especially beans, plants and stuff, because on the roots, you'll see like little nodules on the soil, on the roots themselves, and that's where the microorganisms live and stuff in there. And what they're doing is they're pulling out the nitrogen and stuff out of the soil to actually feed the plants themselves. So all these things are needed to keep healthy soil. So ideally, soil, nutrients, air, water, microorganisms, and the physical structure of the soil work in concert to maximize plant growth and crop production. So you got to have all these things right. And this is why Yahweh says every seventh year to let your land rest. Let the land rest. You put the land aside, you don't use it, you let it rest so that it can reproduce itself and become healthy and be ready to produce. And Yahweh says, look, if you do what I tell you to do, you're not going to have to worry about food, because in the 6th year, we're going to produce so much, it's going to last you through that amount of time. So think about it. Think about how hard the microbes have to work in that 6th year to be able to produce much more food, so that the person can have it, so they can store it out through that time and actually keep that year to where the land can rest. So if you think about the love and the mercy that Yahweh teaches through His laws, you can see how beautiful He's made the earth. But viruses and other entities that require bacteria or other cells in order to make copies of the genetic material and to construct new casings that house the genetic material. Scientific studies have shown that 10 to 100 million viruses can be present in a teaspoon of seawater. 10 to 100 million viruses can be present in 1 teaspoon of salt water. 10 to 100 million. That is amazing. For example, the high numbers of disease-causing viruses in a bacterial species called they can cause in coastal waters influence. That's E. coli, isn't it, or something? I think it's the same thing as E. coli. Can cause in coastal waters influenced by human waste. Yes, it is, because that's where E. coli comes from, is human waste or sewage. And you see that. It's that, many places, especially out in the country and stuff, they just don't think, You run your septic right on out to the water, in the river, and all the sewage goes straight into the river. And then that's why when I was young, Mom would always say, you're not going swimming. You stay out of the bayous, But when it would rain and the water would come in there and the water would rise real high and the currents would be flowing a lot, it would be cleansing itself and pushing all the stuff out, and then she didn't mind so much. But she always said, stay out of the water, because of the fact that, everybody would dump their sewer there. If ingested, these microbes can cause intestinal upset and organ damage that varies from inconvenient to life-threatening, okay? Because that's what E. coli can do. And E. coli is bad, man. I mean, once it hits the system, if it really hits it hard, it just tears the entire body down. It takes a very, very long time to recover from it because of the fact of the damage that it does. And these things, there's also tiny microorganisms that when people go swimming, it would get in to take water into their mouth or their nose, and that little tiny virus would get inside and go straight up the nose, straight up to the brain, and end up going straight to a person's brain. It can kill a person. Furthermore, the viruses that cause hepatitis A, hepatitis E, and polio, along with the protozoan pathogens that cause that and that. Okay, sometimes found in coastal waters and rivers. So these are things that are all over the place. I mean, the thing is that when Yahweh warned man not to sin, he knew all this could take place and was going to take place. But he let man go his own way so that he could see these things actually take place. Yahweh's not cruel. I mean, look, Yahweh is the creator. Yahweh is the one who created us and made man. He made man from the dust of the soil. He breathed life into man. So don't you think he has enough sense and power and authority that if someone dies and their body becomes disintegrated and the microbes thousands of years later they're scattered all over the different parts of the world, blowing way up in the sky where the space shuttle is and so forth, and down deep below the bottom of the oceans and covered with who knows how many thousands of feet of soil? He's the creator. Nothing's too hard for Yahweh. He's going to take those microbes and he's going to pull them right back and put them. You're going to do that. You're going to call forth those microbes from all over the earth, wherever they are, and you're going to call them together and form a body. So you're going to have to know everybody's name who's ever lived on the earth. So remember that. That's going to be on your test, next test. No. But that's what's going to take place. I mean, that's the power that Yahweh has. So when Yahweh has the power, he knows that, this is why he can allow mankind to go through this lesson. There's nothing cruel about it. But the world can't understand it because of the fact that Satan tells them, how can you worship a creator who allows babies to die? Well, how can you worship a demon, They don't think about that. But the thing is that Yahweh has the power and authority that he's going to restore all of these things. Nothing's too hard for Yahweh. He's going to restore it all. And the thing is, when he restores those people, they're going to be more healthy than ever were in their life when they lived here on earth, So he's allowing all this to take place for a reason. Okay, drugs in water raises concerns. Residues of birth control pills, antidepressants, painkillers, shampoos. Not all shampoos are safe to use. There's certain ingredients that should be stayed away from. And a host of other compounds are finding their way into the nation's waterways. And they have public health and environmental officials in a regulatory quandary. The pharmaceutical and personal care products are being flushed into the nation's rivers from sewage treatment plants or leaching into the groundwater from septic systems. You see, these sewer treatment plants have caused so much problem because of the fact that, man, this is why Yahweh warns living house to house, like in the big cities and stuff, because when people get together like that, they no longer can utilize the soil. So they cram together. So they have to make these soil treatment, these sewer treatment plants. And then everybody's waste goes into that, and they got to get rid of it after they, quote unquote, clean the water. Then they pump it all into the rivers and so forth, especially like in New York and so forth, all those different places that any of the big cities that are along the water supplies, but it's everywhere, and these things are pumped into the ground and they're pumped into the water supplies, and it makes its way to all parts of the earth. Because remember, you're drinking water. The glass of water you may have tonight, Adam may have drank that water. It's the same water that's being reproduced, that's just being cleansed and going through the water cycle over and over and over again. So if you pollute it, eventually it's going to come back to mankind to where they're going to end up drinking this stuff, putting it in their bodies. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, researchers have found these substances called emerging contaminants. Yes, it must have had a board meeting for that. Let's call these things emerging contaminants. Hey, I like that idea. Okay, let's call it emerging contaminants instead of just sin, downright sin. Almost everywhere they have looked for them. Others are adding pharmaceuticals to the list of hazardous household waste. Notice, pharmaceuticals are added to the list of hazardous household waste because people will take their drugs and flush them down the toilet. Now, those drugs are going to go down that toilet to the sewage treatment plant. They're going to treat that water, and then they're going to pump that right back to your taps, and you'll be drinking the same pharmaceuticals that you flush down your toilet. You know, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. But they don't have any sense because sin makes people dumb. It makes them ignorant. They can't make right decisions. Others are adding pharmaceuticals to the list of hazardous household waste, like leftover paint or insecticides, periodically collected for safe disposal, often by incineration. You know, if they try to incinerate this stuff, it doesn't always completely burn everything up. But worries about waterborne chemicals flared last summer when researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey said it had discovered intersex fish in the Potomac River. The fish, smallmouth and largemouth bass, were male, but nonetheless carried immature eggs. So you can see how it's affecting everything that lives in the waters, those things that live in the air, those things that live in the ground. They're all being affected by the sins of man. Because according to Yahweh's law, there would be no pharmaceuticals. You know, pharmaceuticals would come up by a way in which mankind just does it to make money. It doesn't really treat, it just makes them money. And it destroys the earth while it's at it. But keep in mind now, it shows how the environment is changed by these bugs, these microorganisms that's created by man. Of course, in abundance, and our protective environment is being altered along with the soil, the water, and even the air. Continuing on, it says, Chris Metcalf of Trent University in Ontario reports that finding a broad mix of drugs, including anti-cancer agents, psychiatric drugs, and anti-inflammatory compounds, levels of prescription drugs that we have leaving sewer treatment plants in Canada are sometimes higher than what we've been seeing in Germany, he says. So, it's there, all over the place. So we've all come to understand that our soil and our water, it's alive, it's brimming with these bugs, you know, that work for mankind, and they're beneficial for our food supply. We've got to have them. We live off of these things. Well, Scripture calls these creeping things. In Genesis 1:26, Yahweh said, I will make man in my image according to my likeness, and they will have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Now, who has rulership for those things now? Yahweh does, right? Yahweh supplies all the things necessary for these things to live. And this is what he promises to give to us, so that we can learn how to take care of everything. Correctly translated, instead of creeping things that creep, it should read, with all with which the ground creeps or teems. Now, this generation, of course, we've come to realize that these very beneficial bugs can be harmed. And by doing so, this, of course, diminishes the food supply on which all life depends. You know, we depend upon these things. But remember, the purpose of this segment is to explain the protective shield that Yahweh places around the earth, and he's causing this shield to diminish. But as you look at all these things, you can see, because the air, the water, the soil, they all work together. You know, all this is part of the biosphere of earth that mankind needs. So it's all affected. And it's affected because the firmament is affected. Now, pesticides. Although pesticides are made from natural substances And there are some, just like they've taken with the corn, the BT corn, okay? They've taken that and made that into a genetically modified corn, so it has a pesticide built into it, okay? Well, guess what? The earth already makes that. The soil already makes that BT pesticide naturally, but they just don't give it time enough to work and to take care of itself. But Yahweh's already put these things in the soil. But pesticides, although they're made from natural substances, are nonetheless called chemicals. When certain kinds of substances are placed together, or when one is used in extra strength, such as E. coli, or E. coli bacillus, something like that, found in the intestinal system, is used in protein synthesis experiments. It can become dangerous and hard for the creeping things in the earth to defeat. But they can defeat them in time because the microorganisms were designed to overcome, to turn them and their protein back into usable things. So Yahweh designed all these creeping things to be able to take care of itself. Otherwise, we'd have been wiped out long ago. Mankind wouldn't be living for 6,000 years. He'd have been wiped out long, long ago. So Yahweh made it to where it could take care of itself and fight these things off, and it does. But Yahweh also is like stepping back and allowing some of the protection to diminish, to teach man this lesson. Yahweh designed all the creeping things with which the earth creeps to benefit mankind. Yahweh also designed what is now being called the ozone layer, the protective shield. It's called the firmament in English. Dr. Herschel, he's the one who's a famous astronomer. Dr. Herschel's discoveries by means of his magnifying telescopes show that what we call the sun, meaning we cannot actually see the sun itself, is only the atmosphere, that luminary, that this atmosphere consists of various elastic fluids that are more or less lucid and transparent, and that the clouds belonging to our earth are decompositions of some of the elastic fluids belonging to the atmosphere itself, so that in the vast atmosphere of the sun, similar decompositions take place. Basically what he's talking about is the sun. If you know about the sun, as we see the sun, you can't see the surface of the sun, because it's just a constant ball of gas, as they say, but it's continuing to be there. And these elastic fluids and so forth are from the magnetic fields and so forth as the sun burns, and you have the flare-ups come up and so forth. The decomposition that Dr. Herschel and his team noted was a continual cleansing of the firmament or atmosphere. Because what takes place is as the sun comes and goes through the atmosphere itself, those protons and so forth, they penetrate all the way down here to Earth, and even begin to warming up the soil so that the seeds can grow and so forth, and the grass and everything else needs it. But as it's coming through the atmosphere, it's also tending to purify. How when you wash, white clothes and you hang them out on the lines, and the sun would get to it to bleach them out, right? To make them whiter and so forth and cleanse. It begins to actually cleanse the shirt and actually cleans it. And UV rays actually has cleansing effect. I think it was Israel was using it to take, salt water and so forth from the waters there and running it through a system and actually using the UV rays from the sun to actually take the salt out of the water so that they could actually use the water. So the Hebrew word rakia, I think it's called, translated firmament, means to spread out like a curtain or tent or pavilion. That's what you look at when you look at it in Hebrew. That's what it is. It's like a curtain spread out over the earth. Okay, and when you look at pictures of the earth, it's just here you have the big old huge globe of the earth, and you get this very tiny, tiny little thin layer, and you see it in pictures. That's the atmosphere. That's the only thing that protects you, keeps you alive from being out, from the stuff that's out in space. The prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 40 verses 21 and 22 says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? Now notice what he's saying here. Do you not know these things? Have you not heard of these things? Have you not been told from the very beginning? In the very beginning in Genesis, Yahweh tells us about the firmament, that he made the firmament, right? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? You know, the building of the earth, the creation of the earth, but also, remember, the foundations are those governments that are taking care of the earth and so forth, too. And all the planets that involve the earth and the galaxy and so forth in which we live in, allowing all this to work together so that mankind can remain alive on earth. So when you look up at the sky, you mostly just see darkness with a few little patches of light and so forth. But all that's in there that we can't see is being used to keep us alive as well. Notice, have you not seen these things? It is he, talking about Yahweh, who sits above the circle of the earth. Now notice, the circle of the earth, that's talking about the firmament. But it's also a fact that it's telling you that this earth was a circle. Okay, it's a globe. And its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. Okay, that's those little tiny microorganisms that appear to look like grasshoppers in the eyes of Yahweh. He stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and he spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. So he gives you the idea of how the firmament just covers the whole earth. The word rakia also means expanse or space. And that space or expansion separating the clouds, which is in the higher regions of it from the seas which are below. So this is what we call the atmosphere. This is the orb where all the atoms and the small particles, even smaller than the atoms and so forth, are make up. So this firmament or this atmosphere, or this sphere, was created by Yahweh as a protection and continual cleansing shield of the earth's dispersants. There it is. So the air we breathe can renew or purify itself. Okay, because if it didn't, guess what? We'd all be dead right now, right? Because we're inside an enclosed building. So all the air that you're breathing in, you're also breathing out carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide is filling up this whole room. But yet, the way that Yahweh made the firmament, you have to be up on a high mountain to get clean, fresh air, right? But it's there, and it actually will take care of itself by cleansing these things. And so it's actually taking care of all the things that you need to keep you alive. So it actually purifies the air. In Genesis 1, verses 6 through 8, it says, and Yahweh said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let there be a separation between the waters from the waters. And so Yahweh made the firmament and separated the water from the firmament from the water above it, and it was so. And Yahweh called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So after Yahweh says, after Yahweh brought forth the knowledge of his law, he set, you remember that's the first thing he did, let there be light, let there be my law, right? Satan and her children came, and he allowed them to destroy the earth and so forth. Well, now he's going to replenish it, but before that time, there was no knowledge of Yahweh, right? He didn't allow it. He hadn't put it on the earth yet. And this is why the children of Satan destroyed and so forth. But after he got rid of them and said, no longer, then he put forth his law, brought forth the light, and then on the second day, he causes the firmament to separate the waters between the waters. The waters that's called on the earth is called the seas, and the clouds and so forth that goes and stretches way beyond that. So think of it. If the air was not being continually cleansed, it'd be like a group of people in an unventilated room. We know that the earth is alive with beneficial enzymes and microorganisms, as Yahweh says, with all the creeping things with which the earth creeps. The waters are the same brimming alive with beneficial life that's made for mankind. That's why when you look at a microscopic drop of water and you see all of these bugs and all of these little tiny things swimming around, each and every one of those things are needed for our bodies to keep us alive. And that's in pure water. So you can imagine if the water is polluted, how much more stuff is in there, and how these things are fighting against the pure elements that's in the water and the pure microbes that are there. that are meant to keep Yahweh's law. Okay, that's the thing. Remember, Yahweh made law, okay, and everything is governed by law. So these microorganisms, they have to abide by those laws, and they willingly do it, and are joyful in life when they do it. They enjoy, remaining pure and clean, so that they can benefit us, mankind. But when contaminants come into the water, now they have to fight against these things. So it disrupts their entire life cycle. So these bugs, it says, think of the firmament as being alive with with kingdoms, living kingdoms of bugs and microorganisms, whose job is to keep pure air for mankind. Remember, the earth was made for man, and the firmament was made for man, because all things were made. Remember, before man was created, Yahweh made everything. He made everything perfect and set everything up so that he could create man, and the earth would actually keep mankind alive. And remember, he had to continue to do that. If he stopped maintaining all these things, then man would have died within the first day he was made. So he continues to keep everything going. The firmament and global warming. For those who actually desire the truth and desire to know what mankind's doing to cause global warming, he says, I'll show you the brain's computer, the microorganisms that must be allowed to do their jobs to control the heat, the snow, rain, the wind, the earth, and the sea. And remember, Yeshua had control over these things, right? He had control over these things. They obeyed him. And people were amazed and said, who is this man that even the winds will obey him? Well, the King James Version is translated firmament from the Hebrew word rakeh. We have translated expanse in the book of Yahweh. But it was a pure, transparent expanse made up of micro-kingdoms that envelops and governs the entire globe for mankind. He says, govern? Yes. Consider this first. Mankind, or any other life form as we know it, could not remain alive at all without the things that we receive from the sun. The sun is a very powerful unit and would consume the earth and all life if its powers that come to earth to sustain mankind's life was not managed. So everything has to be managed properly. All these laws that govern all of these things, and that's a dead giveaway when Yahweh said, let there be light. That was his laws. And when his law went into effect, that's when he set into effect all the government that takes care of all of these microbes, and this is how every microbe that he has made knows exactly what it's supposed to do. And I use this example a lot, but this is why you don't see leaves growing on rocks. And you don't see a tree with rocks instead of leaves. Because these are laws that have to be followed. That rock must remain a rock. It's got a purpose for a rock. That's nutrients to the soil, actually, when it begins to break down and so forth. And the leaves are needed on a tree. A tree would die if it didn't have the leaves. That's how it breathes and takes in the nutrients out of the firmament into itself and brings it into the plant itself to survive. All of these things are governed through the laws of Yahweh. Here it talks about the sun. It says a 5th century B.Y. philosopher of Athens supposed that a great meteorite which fell at Aegiopotami in the daytime about 467 B.Y. to have something to do with the sun. He imagined that the sun must be a mass of red-hot iron that came from the schools of the higher learnings at Athens. That's where that came from. With the invention of the telescope, Galileo Galilei and a few others, almost simultaneously around 1610 to 1611, discovered sunspots. With new telescopes and ancillary instrumentation of great sophistication, such as the spectroscope in 1870, dark bands were discovered in the spectrum of light radiated from sunspots, from which it was concluded that some gaseous eruptions in the neighborhood of sunspots now called flares. So it just tells you about the fact that they discovered flares. Remember, sun flare it's just, and the outside, the outside's, what we see of the sun is hotter, but the sunspots that you see are just slightly cooler in temperature, and compared to the tremendous heat that you see in the glowing of the sun, it appears to be a dark spot. In 1909 and 1913, a reverse flow inward towards the center of the spot for the gases at the highest levels of the atmosphere above it was found. That's when they discovered the fact that, when you look at the sun, you see the sun flares coming up. There's these tremendous magnetic fields in which that gas eruption, as they call it, goes forth and follows the path of those magnetic fields. And this is what they were discovering. The determination of the sun's temperature has been one of the most difficult problems in solar astronomy. The English astronomer Herschel at the Cape of Great Hope in the War of 1837 observed that the vertical rays of the sun, if totally absorbed, would raise the temperature of a layer of water 1.8 centimeters, or that's a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch, deep by 1 degree Celsius, that's about 33.8 Fahrenheit per minute. So, you could have that much water and it would actually raise it 33 degrees per minute. That's heating up pretty fast. From 1881 to 1942, the findings in astronomy were by far the best because the combination of events and studies showed the firmament is governed. That is, in the microkingdoms that make up the firmament are governed by law. If you notice those dates from 1881 to 1942, that falls within the range towards the end there when their discoveries were really making a lot more sense, because, of course, by that time their equipment was much more advanced and so forth. And remember, technology began to expand, the knowledge began to expand from 1934 onward. What these studies prove is just as the law of gravity is assigned to do one thing in the firmament, so also are each of the microkingdoms assigned to do their job to regulate what it gets to mankind. And gravity is a needed law. Okay, that is a law of Yahweh that is needed. If there was no gravity, you would be flying off the earth right now. There'd be nothing that could stay on the surface of the earth. It would just be floating, flying off. And this is what the flat earthers always want to say. The earth is spinning at so many thousands of miles per hour. You'd be flying off the earth. Well, no, you have the law of gravity to keep you and hold you in place. You're not going to go anywhere. You don't even see and feel, since the earth is so large and the curvature of the earth. You don't even feel the earth moving or anything like that. But all these things are necessary. Yahweh made them for a reason. Mankind has to have these things. Herschel's studies of the extreme heat of the vertical rays of the sun, if totally absorbed, would rise to extreme temperatures on the Earth's surface in minutes. In other words, if the sun was allowed to come full force to the Earth, it would boil off all the water in just a short amount of time and cook mankind. The measurements come easy. What is difficult is the atmosphere absorption. In fact, it's impossible to understand without understanding that a creator, a designer, set laws that govern the microkingdoms to adjust and to allow only enough of the vertical rays of the sun to be absorbed and no more. So then it goes on here into another article. But the thing is that Yahweh set all these things into effect. And if it wasn't, then we couldn't remain alive. Sometimes you go out on a hot summer day and it's really hot outside, but the thing is, even though you feel the heat and you think about how that earth, how the sun is, 93 million miles away from the earth, and yet you feel that tremendous heat coming to you. Well, just think, if it wasn't the protection of the firmament out there, you would just literally just be burnt up, and every leaf and every tree and everything would be completely just burnt up. Everything on the earth would literally, it's like as if you take a magnifying glass and go out in the sun and put it on a pile of paper, the paper just heats up and eventually just consumes. That's what would take place to the earth. If Yahweh didn't have these micro kingdoms in place and had the laws that govern all of these things and govern the amount of energy that we receive from the sun, then mankind wouldn't be able to live. But he put all these things into effect, remember, in the very beginning. As Isaiah said, have you not heard of these things in the beginning? And it's all mentioned, all of these things are mentioned in Genesis and put into place before mankind was ever created and put on this earth.